I'm getting goosebumps. Emily Henry, let's talk about her. This is actually a fan fiction. A lot of specific things that no one talks about. The best book I've read all year. It's that time of the month again where we do our monthly reading journal wrap-up videos. I'm very excited to talk to you guys about what I read during the month of April. Some really good books this month that I can't wait to recommend to you guys. And also, I'm filming this talking head portion a little bit ahead of time. I haven't filmed my journal setup yet, but you guys will be able to watch my journal setup and see all the inspiration and the spreads that I'm making for you. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. But let's just get into it because like I said, I have a lot of things to share and a lot of really cool books that I read this month that I can't wait to recommend to you guys. So I have my statistics for my month here on a notepad and I'm just going to read them off for you guys. Number one, I read 4 books this month, which compared to March where I read 7 books, it's a little bit of a letdown, but I'll tell you why in a few minutes why I had less reading this month. In total I read 1,762 pages, so a decent amount of pages considering I read, again, 4 books. And I read one especially long book this month, so we'll talk about it. Like I said, my average rating was a 4-star rating, and this is because I actually found my second 5-star of the year this month. I had one other 5-star, I think it was last month in March. I had a 5-star book, but it was a novella. It was a very short book, so it counted as a 5-star, but it wasn't like a very big novel. However, I had my first like real 5-star book this month that I can't wait to share with you guys what it is about and what it is. And my other 2 ratings were 2 4-stars and a 3-star. So overall, really good books this month. I read 75% fiction and 25% nonfiction. This is my first nonfiction read of the year. I'm trying is a strong word. I'm not really trying, but I'm enjoying nonfiction a little more, and I'm trying to integrate that a little bit into my reading because I basically only read fiction. I think it's important to give yourself a little bit more variety. As far as my emotions or the moods of the books that I was reading, so I have funny, emotional, sad, reflective, mysterious, and then informative. I think that one is from the nonfiction book. So not the brightest emotions, but there were some still like funny and emotional in a good way. There's some hopeful books this month. As far as my general reading goal, so I set a reading goal every single year, and this year it was to read 50 books and 18,000 words. And I'm very much ahead of my goal right now. I'm at 40% of the way ahead the book-wise, so I'm ahead by 4 books, and I'm at 41% pages-wise, so I'm ahead by 1,389 pages. So like I said, I'm pretty far ahead, which is good because, spoiler alert, I'll talk about this a little later in the video, but I am currently in a book slump. So I am not reading anything right now, and so I need this little bit of grace period, and thankfully I'm ahead of my reading goal, so I have a little bit of wiggle room and I don't have to read that much right now if I'm in a slump. Let's get into the books that I read so far this month, starting out with the nonfiction. So if you guys have been watching these videos throughout the year, you would have seen that I have been slowly over the course of the semester reading Why Explaining the Holocaust by Peter Hayes. This is a nonfiction book explaining just very background information about the Holocaust, and it's a very general overview, I think, and I was required to read it for a class that I'm taking in school. However, a lot of times when I'm required to read books, you read them, you scan through them, you don't actually read the entire textbook, but this was like a 350 page book, and I thought it was very interesting. I'm very interested in the Holocaust. I think it's something that's very important to learn about. I actually just wrote like a 12-page research paper last week about the factors of the Holocaust. I think it's a very interesting topic that should be talked about, obviously. So I think this book was very informative and very useful. As someone who's obviously been learning about the Holocaust since like second grade, no, I didn't go to second grade, since 3rd grade, and has, been learning about it all throughout my life, I thought this was a very interesting novel because it took all of the aspects of the Holocaust that you already generally know, but it went very much into detail about them, gave you lots of quotes, lots of statistics, lots of secondary sources, and just had a lot of other information to kind of boost up this story and book more than it is. It is nonfiction, so it's not really a story, it's a book, but you guys get what I'm saying. There was also a lot of elements in this book that I just wasn't aware of, like a lot of specific things that no one talks about, like for example, the impact of women as Nazis, like female Nazis, the impact of the Pope, and the impact that the Catholic Church had in the overall Holocaust. Why didn't other countries help or do more to help save the persecuted victims during the Holocaust? Things like this. So very interesting and very informative, and it was overall a really good book, actually. I gave this book as a rating 4 stars. I thought it was very good, and as someone who again does not read nonfiction, okay, I was very surprised that I actually finished a book required for school, mind you, that I actually really enjoyed. So yeah, this is not a book that I'm going to be returning. I'm keeping this book, and if you're really interested in this topic, you want to learn more, you want to find a new nonfiction book, this is a great option, I think, personally. So I thought this book was very good. Peter Hayes seems to be a very, very well-known, well-researched, well-educated scholar. And yeah, starting off with a bang. I did start this book in January, but I finished it this month, and so I'm very glad to finally check that one off the list. The second book I read was Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher. This one I've heard a lot about, just from other creators, and I hadn't actually looked into what it was about. I just kind of like jumped right into it. I was going on a road trip on myself up to Oklahoma for Easter to visit my grandparents, and so I was going to be on the car for a couple hours by myself, and I wanted something to do, so I pulled up the audiobook for Paladin's Grace on Spotify. I started listening to it. I thought the audiobook was very good. The man that narrates it has a very nice and calming voice. But overall, this was not my favorite book ever. Like I said, I went into it blind, so I didn't know basically anything what it was about. I didn't know the premise, I didn't know any of the summary or anything. I knew it was a fantasy, and I knew it had some romance in it. However, this one did not connect with me very much, because I think this is what I would call somewhat cozy fantasy. Cozy fantasy has been a new subgenre introduced recently, I feel, or has been more popularized recently. One of the books that comes to mind is Legends and Lattes. That one is like the #1 cozy fantasy book. It is a fantasy book, but it relies more on just like atmospheric and cozy vibes than really intense high fantasy plots like Sarah J. Maas's book, for example. And so this one for me, although it did have a plot, it was a murder mystery kind of. Someone is being accused for a crime they didn't do. There's also like secrets in this kingdom, and there's like a lot of elements that have that high fantasy element, but overall I just felt like the way the characters were developed, the way the story was developed, leaned more towards that cozy fantasy element, and personally I found that just wasn't the thing for me. This story goes over Grace and Stephen. So Stephen is a paladin, and which is basically like a soldier, I suppose, and his god, so the leader of his group of soldiers, died, and that was like something that was crazy. No one's like, oh my gosh, a god can die. And then Grace is a perfume maker in just a random nearby town, and it has their romance involved along with finding out the mystery, and someone gets blamed for a murder. It was good. I thought it was a well thought out story. I thought the element of having perfume and like crafting perfumes being an element is very creative. I've never seen anyone make that kind of story before, but it just wasn't for me. I didn't love it as much. I thought the writing, it had some jokes in it, and it was very like sweet and wholesome, but not my cup of tea as far as like a really great book. So I'm gonna go back and reread. Like I'm not really reading this, unfortunately, and I'm not gonna continue with the series. So good book, 3 stars, but not my absolute favorite. And we'll see if I read anything else by T. Kingfisher, because I've heard a lot of good things by her. And I do like her writing, but this book just wasn't my thing, so. Okay, next I read Funny Story by Emily Henry. So this book actually just came out. I'm filming this video right now. It is April 29th, but I think this book came out just a couple days ago. However, I got this book like early April because I got an arc of it through Libro FM. So I started this book like the beginning of April and finished it April 10th, and it was a really good book. Emily Henry, let's talk about her, because I've read a couple of her books, not all of them. I read Beach Read 2-3 years ago, and I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was a fantastic book. I haven't reread it since. I feel like currently my thoughts on it, I probably bring it down to a 4-star book, just because it hasn't really stuck with me like most 5-star books do. Beach Read might be a 4-star read as of right now, but it was still a phenomenal book. However, after that I read People I Met on Vacation, and unfortunately that book did not click with me. I feel like the characters were cringy. I feel like the story was a little weird. I didn't like it, so I gave that book 2 stars. Not my favorite. Since then, she has released Book Lovers, which I actually own, but I haven't read, and she also released Happy Place last year, which I didn't read. So those 2 books have obviously gotten a lot of hype, good and bad reviews. Mostly good, but I've seen some bad reviews. Haven't read them. However, when I got the arc for Funny Story, I was like, well, I should read it. I have the arc, I'm very excited about it, and I wanted to give her another chance. So I gave it another chance, and I ended up reading this book 4 stars. So very good, I thought, very good story. This is actually a very interesting premise. So it takes the story of Miles and Daphne. That's her name, Daphne. So this is the story of Miles and Daphne, and both of them were previously dating or engaged to other people, but those 2 other people were actually childhood friends. Both of them broke up and got together. Does that make sense? So Miles and Daphne's exes got together, and now Miles and Daphne are roommates because their exes took Daphne's place, where Daphne used to live. So Daphne went into where Miles and Petra, Miles' ex, used to live. Does that make sense? That's so confusing. But basically, it's a roommate trope. It's fake dating. It's our exes got together and now what are we going to do without them kind of thing. It's a very interesting story because obviously both of them are still kind of feeling grief and regret over their past relationships. Both of them are wondering like what they did wrong, if they did anything wrong. They're both in very transitional periods of their life, clearly. Daphne is trying to find a new job, potentially looking to move. Miles is also in a period of his life similar, and so it's a very interesting story. I felt like it had a lot of good writing. Emily Henry has a good way of introducing other subplots and boosting up. So not just a romance, there's a lot more layers to the story. It's not just like two people fall in love at the end. Like there's elements with Daphne's parents, there's elements with Miles' home life, his sister, making friends as an adult, which I'm not there yet, I'm in college, but I do understand the struggle of making friends for sure. So yeah, a lot of really interesting things in this novel that I thought was very good. And overall, although it didn't give me that 5-star spark, I thought it was still like a really entertaining novel. And I really enjoyed Miles and Daphne's relationship, specifically Miles, which is very interesting because he started off this story as a smoker, and I am very anti-smoker. I don't smoke. So I didn't think I really liked his character that much. And not to judge, but like overall, the way that his character was developed at the beginning, I did not think I was going to enjoy his character very much. But I did. I thought it was a very interesting character, very layered, very well developed. And Daphne as well, I feel like I relate to her a lot in a lot of different aspects. So overall, I thought it was a very good book, and I gave it 4 stars. But Emily Henry does deserve her fame and her popularity because she has very good writing and knows how to write a very good book. The last book I read in April, I actually finished on April 19th. So a week and a half ago I finished this book, and I haven't read anything since. And that was my first 5-star read of this month, my second of this year, and what could be the best book I've read all year. Let's sit on that for a second because what? It's April, love. But this book, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. This was phenomenal. And you're gonna probably laugh when I tell you this, but this was actually a fan fiction. So this wasn't actually an official published book. This is a fan fiction, and that is Manacled by Sin Yu. This was not in my 2024 bingo card, I'll tell you that. Was reading a fan fiction, and 1,000-page fan fiction. Okay, this was over 900 pages. But it is true, so I don't know what to tell you. This is actually Hermione fan fiction, which if you don't know, that is Draco and Hermione from Harry Potter. Now, as a kid growing up, I never read Harry Potter, okay? I was always a Percy Jackson kid, and I still stand by that. Percy Jackson books, I'm sorry to the Potterheads out there, Percy Jackson books are better than Harry Potter books. Sorry, I don't make the rules. I read the Harry Potter books in like 7th and 8th grade after I read Percy Jackson. That being said, I was never a huge Harry Potter fan. I watched some of the movies, I didn't finish all the movies, whatever. But I know the story, obviously, and I know the characters. And when I heard that Hermione fanfiction was like a big thing out there, like not just little stories, but like full-length novels, like 900 pages, that's a brick. Like if I had it in paperback, it'd be like this thick of a book of Hermione. Like that's wild, but it was fantastic. And the reason why isn't just their romance, because I do appreciate them. I mean, I love you, Ron, but like Draco's the hot one. I'm sorry, I told my mom that too. I was like, as much as we love Harry, as much as we love Ron, Draco is the hot one, and the girls that know it, and the girls that get it. So I can appreciate the fact that they got together in this book, but this book was more than just a romance. So this book takes place after the Harry Potter books, so that final war where Harry won in the final books of Harry Potter. This book takes place a couple years after that, and it changes the story so that Harry actually lost, and Voldemort won. So Harry's dead. Ron's dead. In fact, almost all the characters are dead except for like Snape, Ginny, Hermione, Draco, and a couple others are still alive. And if you've read The Handmaid's Tale, which I read The Handmaid's Tale last year, and that's a story about a dystopian world where women are actually basically just used as uteruses with 2 legs. They are just surrogates for men, and they basically just get used to increase the population, where the men are the ones that are leading the society, and etc., etc. So there's a very similar plot in this book where basically during the war, Voldemort is trying to repopulate because many people are dying in the war. So he takes a lot of the Death Eaters and he gives them muggles to be their surrogates, essentially. And so you can see where I'm coming with this. Draco was a Death Eater, Hermione is a muggle. And when I first heard this concept, I was like, no way they're gonna make me try to appreciate Draco's character when he's a villain in this story. Like he was a villain before. Not only he's on Voldemort's side now, though, he's also a Death Eater who is basically in the surrogate program. Like that's, I'm not gonna like you You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to appreciate your character if you're doing horrid things to people. But the way the story develops is like the first period is Hermione getting chosen to go to Draco's house. And then the middle section is a flashback period. And that flashes back to during the war, where there's a lot of back and forth, like connection between Draco and Hermione for a specific reason I will not spoil. It is a spoiler, but they have to stay in contact with each other for a very large period. And so like a very large chunk of the book, I would say like half of the book in the middle is just flashbacks. And then you really understand, oh, wait, they're actually soulmates. Like, they're actually soulmates. And then you flash back to the present time again, and I won't spoil, but let's just say that Draco is not a bad character. Like, you understand what happened at the beginning and like why he did what he did because of what happens during the middle and at the end. Like, it's very dark. It's very dark, okay? But it makes sense. And this process that the author takes us through, present, past, and present again, it's a journey for sure. But it dives in so deep into the characters and like their flaws and their motivations and everything that you just really understand them, and it's so well written. And another thing too is this book talks a lot about war, and not only just like the physical fighting and violence and magical war and stuff like that, but the effects of war and PTSD and intense depression and stuff after the war. And there's this like magical like occupancy, which is like the way that people in the wizarding world can like organize their memories, and that was a huge part of the book as well. And I think that this, although it is completely fictional and is based on a fantastical world, can be applied to our current day so well, because obviously people who go to war have very, very similar like symptoms of PTSD and incredible mental illness because of the horrors that they witnessed, and it's very realistic despite it being a fantastical book. So overall, as you can tell, I gave this book 5 stars. It was so good. Now, I made a list of trigger warnings because there are a lot of them. So I don't want to list them because this is definitely a triggering book. So this book includes mentions and or descriptive scenes of rape, sexual assault, torture, impregnation, war, violence, gore, medical gore, self-harm, PTSD, severe depression, death, and suicidal thoughts. So make sure you're in a very good place before you read this book, because the Lord knows I'm not about to recommend something that I don't want any of you guys to be put into a mental state, because for me, I was in a great mental state before I read this, but like the 2 days while finishing and after finishing this book, my mental state went downhill. Let's just say it that way, because I was like, not only was I sad that the book was ending, but the book is just very, very descriptive. It's very hard to read. Not even for like the violent scenes or like the assault scenes, but just like the scenes of specifically Hermione's mental state after the war are incredibly descriptive and incredibly hard to read. So make sure you're in a good spot when you read this. But that being said, personally, I devoured this. Personally, this might be the best book I've read all year. Personally, I'm probably gonna have to reread this at some point because I like inhaled a 1,000-page book in like a week. So like, I'm probably gonna have to read this again in the near future. With that being said, ever since I finished Manacled, I've been in the most intense book slump of my life. I usually get into a little book slump after I get a 5-star read because I'm just like, how am I supposed to compare? You know, how am I supposed to find something as good as this? So usually I take a little break or try to read something like the complete opposite, but I haven't read anything recently. After I read that book, I went into a little film era. Since I'm not reading, I use that free time to watch movies, and I'm a film major, so I love, you know, seeing new films. During my little movie watching era for the past like week or so, I've watched a couple of movies. I watched Knives Out for the first time, which I loved. 5 stars. Oh my gosh, it deserves the hype. Really good. I did guess a little bit of the plot, but the cinematography made up for the fact of the things that I guessed, so it was really good. Then I watched Glass Onion, which is the sequel, and again, fantastic. I also gave that 5 stars. It was very good. And I think I watched something else too. Can't remember, but I watched another movie. I'll put it here on the screen if I can remember it. As of right now, that's where I'm at. I'm not reading anything like really right now, and I'm trying to embrace that. Like I said, I am ahead of my reading goal, so I have a little wiggle room. I have a little leeway as far as catching up to myself. But yeah, Manacled put me in a slump, and I'm sitting in that slump right now. So if you have any book recommendations for me, let me know down below. What are you reading right now? What do you want me to read? That was my reading wrap up for April. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe below as always, because I post videos every single Saturday. And I also know that a portion of my viewers are not subscribed. So if you got this part of the video and you like what I'm creating, you must want to see more of me, right? So hit that subscribe button down below. Join us. I post videos, like I said, every single Saturday, and I want to see you for the next one. That being said, here is the final spread, my reading journal spread. I'm sure it's beautiful. I hope you enjoy it. If you want to hear more about my reading updates in real time, I post all the books that I read on Goodreads and Storygraph, and they're both linked down below. Follow me, I'll follow you back. We can be friends on those platforms so we can talk about books together. And with that, that's pretty much it. So I will see you guys next week. Goodbye.